Microphone check, microphone check. Hey, what's up? This is the Intricately Woven Podcast, and I am Rachel Cancino-Neal, health restoration coach and nutritional therapy practitioner in training. I'm here with my husband, Derek Neal.
Hey.
There he is, folks. We are here to talk to you about how to keep your tree healthy. Part one. Yes. So if you remember tree, I'm using as to remind us about the nervous system. So we're talking about how to keep your nervous system healthy. In this particular episode, we're going to be looking at how can trauma and self-awareness be a part of your nervous system story. You ready for this?
Sounds interesting.
I think so. All right, let's do this. Well, Derek, I'm really excited about this episode because I get to talk to my best friend Liz. And I'm going to tell you more about that in a second, but I'm just really excited. But before we get into this whole thing, I want us to remember why we even started this conversation about the nervous system. I don't know if you remember why, but let's just make sure we remember.
Sounds good.
Okay. So, in the first episode, I covered these 6 foundations that are presented by the Nutritional Therapy Association. And these are 6 foundations to benefit your health, basically. And so many people can benefit if they just paid attention to these foundations. And the first foundation has to do with digestion. Okay? And so, in the next episode, I said, hey, digestion, yes, but let's take a pause and look at the nervous system, because that directly impacts your digestive health. You remember all that?
I do.
Okay, good. Okay, so I mentioned before that when our nervous system is amped up or stressed out in that fight or flight response, our digestive function switches, right? So It slows down because it's not necessarily like an emergency thing. And so our body will favor emergency processes, especially when we're in a chronic state of stress of some sort. Now, Let me ask you, does it matter if you're aware of the stress or not? No. So being consciously aware of the stress doesn't matter. If your nervous system is responding to something, whether or not you're aware of it, it's still responding to something, right? And so in this line of thinking, we need to make sure we're exploring the different things that can be stressing out our bodies and what that can look like.
Right. So like last time we were also talking about the power of perception.
Right. Yes.
And you mentioned abuse, neglect, and trauma are that they can impact our perception, which also impacts our reality.
Right.
Is that something we can talk a little bit more about and get some more clarification on?
Yeah, so that'll be good because abuse, neglect, trauma can result in loss of self-awareness. And I mentioned last time that whole thing is impacted by, what gets filtered in, what gets filtered in and what gets filtered out.
Right.
So yes, so we're going to talk about that. And like I just mentioned a moment ago about getting to talk to my best friend Liz. Liz and I have been friends for a long time now, and she has different experiences of being a SPED teacher and at the same time being a youth pastor. For a while she was actually the head pastor, or stepping in that role, and now she's a counselor. So she has a broad spectrum, and we've been through a lot of stuff together. So I'm really excited that we get to have this discussion about trauma, like the different kinds of trauma, and self-awareness and the importance of becoming self-aware. And she does give advice and resources you can use and stuff. So I'm really excited about this conversation, and I hope you are too.
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay, let's listen. I'm here with my best friend for life, Elizabeth Rennau, aka Liz, aka Lizzie Bear.
Oh boy.
Here she is. Liz, say hello.
Hello. You may call me Liz.
Okay, for the remainder of this interview, I'll be referring to her as Liz.
Thanks.
Yes. Okay. So I have my friend Liz here with me because we've been friends way back since 2007. I don't even know the math for that, but it's been a long time. And Liz and I deemed her my best friend on day one.
No, you didn't.
I really did. I was like, hey, Liz, you're so cool. Anyways.
Okay. I don't remember that. Whatever you say.
Just forgotten. Well, I bring her here because she and I have been through different things together, but she has a really interesting work experience life. Her education and also her current profession is fantastic for what we've been talking about as we continue to understand about the nervous system and about how what we think about or perception is important to the rest of our body's health. So Liz.
Yeah.
Okay, just tell us about your work experiences, your education, and then what you're doing now.
Okay. Well, as I've been so graciously introduced, I'm Liz. Rachel and I have been friends since college. And, I think I'm a typical millennial and I've had a lot of careers. And I definitely graduated college with double major in film and intercultural studies, and then I definitely went and worked at Subway for 2 years. But I know that's not the work experience you're talking about. So I did, after that time period, become both a youth pastor and a special education teacher. I got my master's degree in special education, worked as a high school self-contained special education teacher for 7 years. And a big thing that I learned from that was simply the type of personality I have, I guess. Not everyone can do that job.
Yeah.
A lot of people find it really stressful. And I had this magical power of de-escalation.
It's amazing.
I didn't really know why or how. I couldn't explain it. It was just something that I guess naturally gifted at. But what I discovered in those 7 years of working as both a youth pastor and a special education teacher was the parts of those jobs that I really loved was getting to walk with students through life, getting to kind of be there for them, mentor them, things like that. That was where the real joy in those things came from. And so towards the end of those 7 years, I definitely way too long of a story, but basically decided to give counseling a try. I wanted to do that part that I really had joy in. I wanted to learn how to do it way better and professionally and work with that kind of age group as a counselor. And so I went back to school again and got another master's degree in clinical mental health counseling this time. And I've graduated and I am a provisionally licensed professional counselor working on getting my full licensure. So
I had forgotten some of those details, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, the youth pastor part. I
was one of those for a long time.
One of those for a long time. I know. Okay, so that kind of nicely sets the stage. Liz's background has definitely allowed her to have a lot of experience with all different kinds of kids. Mm-hmm. Pretty much a broad spectrum, mostly in that teenage group, right? But so she's experienced a lot of stuff. And so she and I have had a lot of conversations about trauma and how those, can affect us. And one time she told me about the difference between a big T trauma and little T trauma. So I wanted her to explain the difference between those two because I think a lot more people have experience with trauma, but they may not see it as actual trauma.
Yeah, and trauma is kind of a buzzword right now, I feel like. A lot more people are becoming aware of the word trauma and what it means. And also, there's probably at least a smidge of misinformation out there about it too, and things like that. But so the really, really basic definition of trauma, the simplest definition in general, is it's anything that a person experiences that overwhelms their nervous system's ability to cope. And the interesting thing about that is that makes it really individual. So two people can be in the same car accident at the same time. One person can walk away and like develop PTSD, and while the other person doesn't, because it's an individual experience of what your nervous system can handle or not. Now, the difference between big T trauma and little T trauma. Big T trauma kind of refers to these singular incidents that cause that profound impact on your nervous system. So examples would be like the car accident, like a weather event, like a tornado or something, being in a school shooting, like something really big like that just happens,
like a one time big thing that you experienced.
Yeah. Now, little T trauma is different, but it's just as impactful ultimately. Little T trauma is more those everyday things and messages and experiences that add up over time. So, for example, if you grew up with a parent who just maybe made you feel like you weren't smart, and they would say little things like cut down your intelligence, and they did it over your whole childhood and kind of demeaned you like that, that would actually cause the same effects on your nervous system as what a big singular trauma would cause. Like, you would end up with the same type of symptoms.
Which is wild, because so many people have experienced that.
Right.
But they're like, oh, I just kind of got over it. But then you can be super sensitive to when you hear those words again, and maybe it's not those exact same thing, but maybe it's a tone of voice or a facial expression or something, and like, I don't know why, but that just really bugs me.
And, you know, I'm so glad you said that people will say like, well, I'm over that, because actually one of the main symptoms of PTSD is avoidance. And so, but for big T trauma, your avoidance looks like, okay, if I got in a car accident on the street corner, well, I'm finding a new route to work. I don't want to go over there, be there, because you're like scared to be in that vicinity, right? So you avoid the street corner. For little T trauma, the avoidance is like, that doesn't bother me anymore. I'm fine. That was no big deal. So you're still, that's still a way of you avoiding the feelings that come with the trauma. So that's just, the symptoms are not exactly the same, but they do kind of correlate like that.
Yeah. Huh. Well, I think that kind of leads us into our next part with talking about our own personal experiences of our trauma stuff.
Time to get real.
So that description of the big T trauma, little T trauma really does make me like reflect on several different things. So I'll tell my part of the story in a moment. I think you can start.
I'm going to kick us off.
You're going to kick us off about family experiences that were most impactful. You don't need to be like super specific, but just like things that maybe like you realize that your nervous system was responding to, and when you realize that you weren't self-aware and you wanted to become self-aware, and why that mattered. So lots of questions for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You know, I think one of the things that just naturally happens to all children everywhere is they get and receive messages throughout their childhood. And sometimes their parents are not great parents and don't care. Sometimes it's totally accidental. The parent doesn't really know that they're given that message. Like, you can't, it just happens. It's part of every human being's life experience. But I definitely got this messaging growing up, and it wasn't like just from my parents, and I don't think my parents did it intentionally. So, if Mom and Dad, if you're listening, you are off the hook. But just kind of like nothing I did was good enough. And so there were several times where I would so I got that thing where I was that kid who wanted to do everything right. I wanted to be the perfect daughter. I wanted to be perfect. And then there were times when I would be perfect. I would do the right thing that I was supposed to do. I would not have done anything wrong, and then I would still maybe like get in trouble for some reason that didn't have to do with me, or like got shamed or blamed for something anyways, and that just like pounded into me, like literally no matter what you can do, you will never be good enough.
Man.
And so that became like this underlying message of if anyone didn't like me or said something to me, like, you know, as an adult, like that my underlying message would be like, well, you know, because you're not good enough.
Yeah.
Like it's just another proof that you're not, right?
Yeah.
And so you start just only receiving, or like your brain will like latch on to the things that prove that core belief, that support it. And any other thing where people are like, wow, Liz, like, you're great, or whatever, my brain's like, nope. Like, won't hook on to that.
Yeah. In the last episode, I talked about RAS, and it's a part of your brainstem, and it helps to filter in information and what filters out. So, and a like functioning RAS and thinking brain, 99% of information is supposed to be filtered out. But if you've been through trauma or neglect or kind of like it's abuse or, you know, these little T traumas, then your RAS starts kind of shifting in how it works. And so it affects your perception as well. And so your perception, your, you know, how you, all the information your nervous system is getting goes through this filtration process.
Yeah.
It's like what you're saying is like, it goes through this filtration process of like, I've heard it said as a negative bias, where you are looking for those things to confirm your negative thoughts, more like a self-protection, to make sure that doesn't happen. But then you're like trapped in this. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna say, and even though it kind of sounds counterintuitive, it's like a protective thing.
Yeah.
Because it feels way scarier to try to start believing the opposite and then get rejected again,
or be told you're wrong. Yeah. Oh man.
So you do get trapped.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, my kind of similar to that. I just had a lot of in my background, a lot of anger was a pretty big constant. My dad was severely abused as a child. His dad had been married 5 different times. And I have family that traces back to the Holocaust. And this is something I've recently just started realizing is, how did that impact? Like, I had, you know, great aunts and uncles that the last records, and like my great grandparents, last record of them was at a concentration camp.
Wow.
And so I had never stopped to consider how that impacted my grandpa.
Yeah.
And then how that impacted my dad, and then my dad is trying to father us.
Yep.
Right? And so, you know, we hear a lot about like these cycles of abuse. And it, to me, it's always made sense, but it's always like, well, I don't have to do that. And then I realize that's where my nervous system is used to.
Yeah.
So, like when Derek and I first got married, his lack of anger made me incredibly uncomfortable. I was trying to provoke him to anger because that's what I was most familiar with.
Yeah.
Right? And so it was super uncomfortable and scary because his tactic is to kind of just shut it down. And we talked about that in the last episode. When he gets stressed, like you see it all over his body. His face becomes red. So when he's angry, his face becomes red. You know, he's better at saying it a little bit now because I'm like, hey, Derek, what's this negative thing I see? What is it? You know? But, so I've had to become more self-aware of realizing when my anger is starting to escalate because I don't want to be abused. And so I have said many times that I have like one dial up of self-control from my dad. And that is, and I've had more compassion toward him because now I'm realizing, oh shoot, like your whole system was geared up for this. And this is how you filtered everything. And so you would react and then you would apologize, but it didn't seem, didn't seem genuine to me because he would apologize and do it again.
Yeah.
And so he wasn't the only one with anger, but he's always the one I kind of refer to because it was so prominent, and he was the one that I wanted to not have these issues.
Yeah.
So for me, I had to become self-aware and even be to the point where I'm aware that I can have these tendencies like my dad. And what am I going to do to not do that? It's not enough to say, well, I'm never going to do that. You have to have some kind of thought of what you're going to do instead. I'm assuming. I mean, that's how I've lived it. So for you, was there like a moment that you realized, like, did you always know you were doing this? Of like wanting to please everybody and didn't want people to see this, or at what point did you become self-aware?
I'm pretty sure I didn't even think of myself as a people pleaser. I definitely was.
I would never have used that, but yeah, that makes sense.
I was super ignorant to like what was going on inside of me, the messages there, all of the above. It's kind of crazy to think about because there was so much influence and control in some of my core beliefs. And I think at a certain point, I didn't know what to do, and so I really started to also dissociate a lot. So I became very dissociative, and I would forget.
Can you explain what dissociative means?
Yes.
Disassociate.
There's like different levels of dissociation. Some are far more clinically significant. My just type of dissociation was just like my brain would help me out by like disconnecting from that thing that made me uncomfortable, but instead it disconnected me from my feelings, my emotions, and so I feel like really numb. But also my brain would like just move so far away from it. It got to this point where if I felt certain like feelings or discomfort, like I would just immediately, like my brain would like move away, and I became really disconnected from my feelings. I also became really addicted to like any distraction. So because like being left alone with my thoughts would become so painful. So I would constantly be listening to music, for example. I would like wake up, turn on music as I got ready. Sometimes I would put my headphones on while I was walking to the car.
Wow.
And then listen to music on the way to school, listen to the music on the way into my classroom, turn the music on while I was getting ready. Like, I mean, I constantly had to have something to distract my brain because it was so uncomfortable to be left alone with my thoughts to deal with anything.
Yeah.
So that kind of dissociation.
Man, I can totally relate to that because sometimes what I'll say is that my feelings get, like, it gets too much, so I need to, like, go lay down and just watch a TV show or something. But I remember after my brother died a few years ago, going to bed at night was not good. And I always had to have the TV on because to fall asleep. And so I created this habit where I had to fall asleep with the TV on because it was too scary to not do that, because I would start thinking about the big T trauma of his death and then like all the little things that had led up to it, and just start, you know, going through all that right before sleep. And so I would have bad dreams and like it was all these things. So, but even, just on a daily basis, sometimes I'm like, you know what? I don't want to think about this right now. And so disassociate, remove my brain from the process, distract it for a bit so I don't have to feel. Especially if I'm like on the verge of crying. You know, I hate crying. And so sometimes I'll try to do that just so I don't start crying.
Well, for the record, there's something to be said for that. It's not always a bad thing. It's not always appropriate or convenient for you to have a mental breakdown in the middle of your workday or when you're trying to take care of your children. So there's something to be said for an appropriate distraction. There's also something to be said for coming back to and processing what you're going through at some point. Otherwise, that'll just get stuck in you. I think that in the Waking the Tiger book, he refers to it as like a safety valve. That when it becomes too much for our system, there's like a safety valve of disassociating, that can be kind of create that space, like you're saying, like in the middle of a work day. You don't have time to like worry about these things, but if you never have time to come back to it, now you start losing that self-awareness. And so something I referred to in the last episode too, is about when your emotional brain becomes so much stronger than your thinking brain, you start losing self-awareness because the thinking brain's not even like, that's where you do all your thinking and your, you know, your learning and your cognition and all that. And so when you just constantly stuff away, that emotional brain becomes so much more reactive, and your thinking brain can't engage as fully because you haven't given the opportunity to really go through the process of like recognizing what's going on. And so you start losing just overall self-awareness. That's really interesting.
Okay, so I think we agree, talking about the self-awareness, that it's really important, but I kind of think there might be some pros and cons to it. When I reflect back, when I started becoming more self-aware, I would definitely say there was pros and cons. So in your experience, as the SPED teacher, as a youth leader, as a counselor, have there been like pros and cons you've seen of becoming more self-aware, and like, even in your own experience?
Yeah,
Pros and cons.
Definitely. You know what's funny is that when I started going to school for counseling, in every one of our syllabi, they had a whole page devoted to like kind of like pros and cons, but essentially like, here's like the danger of taking this class, because it can be triggering to like learn this stuff, and like because it can cause more self-awareness, and as you're like learning some stuff, you start to like rethink or process your own story, and that can be kind of disruptive to life. And so that's the same for anyone who self-awareness and processing your trauma go hand in hand. So if you want to heal some trauma stuff that you feel is you're stuck in, it's going to have to come with some self-awareness, and vice versa. So the potential cons are that can be disruptive to life. Because once you open that stuff up, you either process it, or it's kind of going to probably re-traumatize you. And so that's something that counselors have to be really careful about, is making sure that their clients are really prepared to do things like grounding themselves, and having plans in safe places, and just skills, so that when they go home and are trying to live their life, they can stay sane. Despite having like worked through trauma. There are also, just FYI, some really, really well researched and good therapies for processing trauma that you don't even have to talk about it. So there's options, but I think the main pro ultimately is that the more awareness we have, the more choices we have.
No, that's true.
So if you're not aware of why you're doing what you're doing, gaining that awareness helps you to like sense when the beginning of a pattern is even happening, and help yourself. And so it can literally change your life. Right. So it's worth it. But it's always goes way better when people are prepared and ready to kind of take that on. So.
And I would say probably a support system, or at least one person that can be with you.
At least. I wouldn't highly recommend trying to do that on your own. I don't know how far you'd get. Because
there's stuff, I remember when I first started going through it in college, and I would be off for a long time, like at least that whole day, and we were roommates, and you kind of just like, okay, you're processing, and sometimes I would get real moody, and but
I don't even remember that at all.
Right. But it is true, like there is definitely more like when you become self-aware, you definitely have options, but at the same time it kind of sucks, because then I can choose not to respond this way right now.
Then it's really on your shoulders.
And it's what you do. Really, So, okay, so let's say somebody really doesn't want to become self-aware, or they're too scared to see the truth about if they have been through abuse, neglect, or whatever it is. Like, what would you say to that person if they're like, nope, I don't want to experience any of that, because for whatever reasons?
So my instinctual answer is, if you're not ready, then it wouldn't work anyways. Like, it's something that will really work best if you're ready to go there. And ready to do the work, because you are wanting a change in your life. And so if someone doesn't need their life to change or want their life to change, they're not likely to even be thinking about that. But if someone is like, man, I want to not keep engaging in this destructive pattern of behavior,
Right.
or what in these types of relationships or whatever it is. I would say your instinct is correct if you think it's going to be painful and difficult. But if you were willing to do, the work, and you're willing to be vulnerable and give it a shot, it can be so worth it and literally change your life like how you're probably hoping it will.
Yeah.
Because trauma's nature is that it keeps us stuck.
Yeah.
And so in order to get unstuck, we gotta heal it.
Yeah. And I would say we're both kind of like evidence of being willing to like go through it.
Yeah.
And there's still things I know for me that I have to be like, oop, okay, going back to counseling, I need some more help working through certain things in my life that I thought I was unstuck from, and I'm still stuck in it. So I do want to ask you, if somebody does choose, I do want to go to counseling, what are some things that you would want somebody to be aware of when they either approach a counselor or that initial meeting, or what would be some good practice for that person?
Okay, we don't have time to answer that particular question right now, but tune in next time so you can hear the answers and hear Liz's suggestion for resources to get you started on the right track for self-awareness and just learning different things if you have been through trauma. She gives some really helpful tips about that. But Derek, you weren't there live for the conversation between me and Liz, so I'm just kind of curious, what were some takeaways you got from that first part of the interview?
Well, I'd say the biggest thing that I caught was her description of this disassociation, and how I've never really thought about listening to music, watching TV, whatever it may be that I fill my life with, to kind of separate from the stresses of life or a trauma that may be triggering that I may not even be aware of. And so I'm going to reflect this week after doing this podcast to find areas that I may be using disassociation.
And I mean, she pointed out too that if you do that, sometimes it's like necessary, right? It's like maybe right now is not the best time to be dealing with the intense emotions that something's bringing up.
Right.
But if you never come back to it, that's where you have problems. Right now we're causing trauma with our cat. We have locked her outside of the room. So if you hear her crying, my apologies. This might be a little trauma moment. I don't know. But yeah, I thought that was interesting too. And it made me remember how often I do use that tactic to kind of just cope with things.
Yeah.
But there you had mentioned also about for kids that they get imprints on them.
Oh yeah, I found that to be interesting, that even as a parent, which we are parents, we may be imprinting things on our kids.
Not may,
good.
we are. We are imprinting.
Which may be good and may be bad, and things that we find that we can manage, but then a child is not able to manage it yet. And just to be able to reflect on that.
Yeah, there was a good book that we read a while ago called How We Love, and there's How We Love Our Kids. I can't remember the authors' names, but it's a husband and wife duo. But How We Love really goes into the impacts of parental imprints and just looking at the realities that good and bad, we will have imprints, and it influences those perceptions. So those reflex responses and how you perceive reality can be traced back. I mean, even to, I've mentioned this I think last time, but even while you're growing in your mother's womb, that your nervous system is being formed. I think it's like at 3 to 4 weeks you already have parts of your nervous system.
Wow.
So anyways, yeah, so it's just really interesting. And again, this is why we're talking about child or and like abuse or trauma or these things that sometimes we brush off as no big deal, we're moving on. If you have digestive issues, meaning like you're not able to break down your food, or you have imbalanced bacteria, or whatever, a lot of pathogens, it is highly recommended that you take a look at what could be going on in your nervous system. Do you have previous trauma, current trauma, stressful situations, Are you living in a very toxic kind of environment? All those things your body is responding to. Again, whether or not you realize it and whether or not you're aware of it. So, I'm excited about the next conversation. And just seeing, or the next part of the conversation, to see what kind of suggestions Liz has for anybody interested in kind of taking the first steps toward becoming more self-aware and dealing with, the stuff that might be going on in their life. So,
Awesome.
yeah. All right. Well, I am Rachel.
And I'm Derek.
And we are hoping to help you put the pieces of your health together. We'll see you next time.
See you later.
Rachel is the best. Listen
Yes.
to her podcast.